Hi everybody, welcome. My name is Karen Bolinger and I'm the Managing Director for PCMA in Asia Pacific. For those of you who don't know who PCMA is, we are the Professional Conference Management Association and we are 60 years young and our headquarters is based in North America. But for those of you who may not know, we actually have a headquarters or a regional headquarters based in Singapore. Now, I'm not coming from there today. I'm actually coming from Melbourne in Australia. So you can see we truly are a global organisation and we're represented across the region very heavily. So for us, we've got a number of people in Singapore. We've got myself in Melbourne in Australia, and we also are leaning on that Pacific edge, and we've got someone based in Vancouver working with us as well. So you're well taken care of. We know the area very well, and we're thrilled to be joining you here today. So thank you for having us. What I will do is I'm going to go through a little bit of a presentation today around some of the research that we have conducted on behalf of the industry. And there's also an opportunity for you to ask us some of your questions. And I could see a little bit in the live discussion, we've got a broad section. We've got some of our friends from the Philippines, so welcome and thank you for joining us. We've got some out of India, and happy Diwali to you guys over there, and we hope you managed to have some wonderful celebrations on that. And then I think we've got the rest of the region ably represented. So again, thank you for enjoying us, and feel free to be open about some of the questions that you have, and we'll be monitoring the Q&A box. Put them in the live Q&A and we'll be monitoring that as we go. So where do we start? Let's talk a little bit about the Business Events Compass and why we actually did it. So I am going to use some slides just to give you some nice visuals instead of just looking at my head. But for us, the Business Events Compass really came around early on this year as soon as COVID hit. So what PCMA did was decided to survey its membership. So we have over 7,000 members, but we've got an audience of 60,000 people around the globe. So it's really important that we got to understand exactly what was going on in their world and the pain points that they were suffering during this period. So the first compass was done and delivered in July. The second one was actually just done very recently, so you're getting very current and up-to-date information. And what that will do will provide some insights to help us inform what our roadmap coming out of COVID will look like. And I think it will be different by region. It'll be a little bit different by sector, but essentially there's still some very big overarching challenges that we face as an industry. But with challenges in my world, you always get an opportunity, and it is what are those opportunities that we want to take forward with. So what we did from a compass perspective, and I'll just jump onto the next slide there. What we did from a study perspective, just to give you some insights as to what the research that was conducted, we actually talked to customers, and I think sometimes we're very neglectful in not talking to our customers, and some of our customers, in fact, will be on here today. So this research and information came from you. So the COVID dashboard, just to back up a little bit, is a piece of research that goes out to PCMA's members. What we did in Asia Pacific was in fact do our own piece of research for the region. And we did that specifically because even though we understand what's going on globally, the large amount of recipients or in fact responses came out of North American based entities. And as you know, in our world, we are in a very different position, and we also need to make sure that we're covering and getting information from the region as a whole. So what we wanted to do is understand a really broad spectrum of what was going on in the world. So it's not just about surveying, the challenges of the business, but understanding how that applied economically and, of course, with the public health policy. So we surveyed actual attendees at events. We wanted to understand what their appetite was to attend events. Would they travel? But more importantly, what were their companies' appetites to travel? And you'll see there in the bottom, in my view, it's the bottom right-hand corner. It could be the bottom left for you, the C-suite customers. And that's where we actually went into corporations and talked to people like the Chief Human Resources Officers, CEOs of businesses and associations. And that was done particularly because even though you and I might think it's okay to travel, the company may actually start to place policies around what is classed as essential travel versus non-essential travel, and what are the risks that they are prepared to allow their people to take. So we actually captured some of that information. But what we also did was invite 130 of the global, I guess, key leaders in the industry to actually really drill down into some of the think tanks. And we had 2 of those that were aimed out of Asia Pacific. So we've got some really great different insights and views that actually helped inform this piece of research. What we also did was get a global view on what were public health policies. So this research, and what you're seeing today is almost the high level. There's a whole other level below this. That then starts to say, you know, what are Singapore's public health policies versus the Philippines versus North America. So we wanted to get an understanding of that. And the reason that we've done that is because that then starts to inform about the speed of recovery, safety of delegates, safety of the industry. So there's a whole bunch of layers that we wanted to understand in that. And then, of course, the economic forecast of the future. And I think it's fair to say that we know that when you're going into lockdown, your economy pretty much comes to a standstill, but certainly when you're coming out of lockdown, and I can certainly talk from experience here in Australia, is that the economy is rising very rapidly. And I would suggest in places like Singapore and in Japan and China, where they're all coming out of lockdown, out of lockdown, as a matter of fact, the economy is starting to regenerate pretty quick. So that actually has some impacts for us as an industry going forward. If anybody's got any questions on that, feel free to ask. I will move to the next slide. So what do we know? What has actually Compass told us from a really broad brush? And I will go into some of these in a little bit more detail, but what it's actually said is, and I think we all know this, that this forum is not how we want to meet. We know that face-to-face will absolutely never be replaced. We miss those human connections. We miss those, you know, little one-off catch-ups that we have over a coffee break, knowledge exchange, how we actually maybe take another business relationship forward. And I think what will happen is, how do we actually restore that and bring it back to a place that we want it to be. And some of that to me is also about our events have to be audience-centric. They have to have the right content and the right experience for people to say, I will get up and leave my office and attend an event. And that's what will change, whereas I think before, we almost got on the rounds of attending events. So when you're planning your event, it means you have to think very, very differently about your content going forward. What we also know is that omnichannel events will be part of the norm. So it's no longer just one-dimensional and face-to-face. It will actually have the whole omnichannel experience. And I'll talk a little bit about that as we go going forward. We all know that digital components were in fact part of our events in the past. This has actually accelerated the technology around that and what it is we will actually do. But what it's also done is ensured that we truly become global audiences, attracting global audiences. So it means that no longer are we actually just, I guess, confined by attendance in face-to-face. And it's just like this platform here. So you can attend wherever you're based, and it might have been an event that you've never attended before, but you've now got that opportunity to attend it. So it means you're actually able to get some content and some education and kind of build a network through this platform. But as we know, it will never replace face-to-face. And what we also found from the research that we've done, that upskilling and reskilling is absolutely imperative to our audience. So we've got some real challenges around that. And I think it's actually about making sure that the people who are in the events industry remain relevant, but what they're also doing is actually learning and educating themselves with some new skills. And I'll talk about that a little bit further as we go as well. And I think that also the value chain. So where do you sit in the value chain? How do we actually re-engineer that and make sure that organisations are still viable and that they're still relevant and providing really great services? I can see we do have a question. Oh, there it is. Oh, sorry, I can't fully read it. I am sorry. It's skipping over a couple of, let me see if I can get that on a different screen. So the question is, I can't, sorry. When will countries be able to recommend leisure travel? I hope I've got that right. What we're asking for, looking for here is, I think, when can you recommend to the countries be able to open their borders to leisure travel? Sorry. The challenge with that is it's actually a government decision. It's out of our industry hands. And I think that that's part of the challenges that we're all having is that countries have a very different view on it. And it is about the safety, and it's about the safety of your own citizens and the safety of the delegate that will be travelling, and of course the economy. What you know, if you're up in and out of lockdown, and I actually think we will be for some time, but I think it's how that gets managed and how do you actually make sure that the mitigation is allayed in the eyes of corporations that are sending their attendees to events. So I don't think there's any one size fits all answer for that, and I don't think it would be my position to be saying to a country to open a border. I think it really will depend on so many other factors in that. So I hope that that helped. I will move on to the next slide. So what's also happened is I guess for us, we were looking at, you know, the economic recovery from a macro perspective. So what does that actually mean for our industry? As you know, when you are in the world of global events, you have people coming from all over the world. And that has actually obviously been prohibited now, and it impacts economies. And that's how governments will stimulate their economies, where they're making their investments and so forth. So what this has actually shown, the research, is that Asia Pacific are in fact in a very good position from leading the way out, both from an economic perspective and of course from an events perspective. So what the research has said, that most people are starting to think by the end of 2021 that we'll actually get back to what we call a bit of normality, and some of that will be based on, you know, borders opening up, access, visa, some of the technology that will be used to actually track and trace COVID, and of course if a vaccine comes into play. And if a vaccine comes to play, I think we will actually have a shift quite significantly. But I really think the biggest thing in the survey are in fact people's health and safety. So it's moved now from, would I recover? And you'll see some of that data. Would I travel? Maybe. But my health and safety now, and I think that's because the virus is a little bit out of control in some parts of the world. Let's talk a little bit about people attending events and conferences and whether they still have that appetite to attend the events. And I think that is really been interesting, and this has actually changed as we have gone on. And what you'll see here is some differences in the, I think I can pull. The difference is in where people will attend events. So if you look at this over May, July and September period, and you'll see that in the bottom left-hand side for me. If it's looking at you, it might be the right-hand side, but you'll see over the last few months, the sentiment has changed quite significantly, from people being probably less, you know, conservative about travel to actually being more conservative about travel. And that's based on the fact that the virus doesn't actually have, I guess, an end in sight, and people are very fearful of their own health. So what you'll see here is a lot of attendees said, I will actually just attend locally. And what that means is if you're in a city, I probably won't use Singapore because it's a state, but if you're in Manila, you may actually just travel within Manila. You may not even go across the Philippines. You may just stay a little bit closer. So you can see 62% of these participants, which in fact has improved over a period of time, will actually say they will attend a local event. So that's very healthy. But 68% of them have actually also said on a national and an international scale, I probably won't attend a business events. So what that actually means for planners is who is your audience? Where will you attract them from? So there's going to be the live component, and then there's potentially going to be the online component, the virtual component. And so from a planning perspective, if you're building this, you need to have that consideration that even though, and I'll use Australia as an example, we are open for business, still parts of us have some restricted travel, but it does not mean that I will automatically get on a plane and go into Sydney from Melbourne to attend a conference. I might still attend virtually for a period of time, and that could be a 6 to 12 month window. So that actually has some very big implications on attendance and, of course, the likelihood of making sure that the events are successful but monetised. And I'll talk a little bit about that as we go forward. So for us, some challenges around that as well. If anybody's got any questions, again, feel free to drop them into the Q&A. What we also asked was about the sentiments of people participating in events, and what will or won't they attend, and in what age group. And you'll see this slide here is incredibly fascinating from who will attend. So you can see the younger groups have said that they will in fact attend events, but the organisation policies in fact influence that. So they may have the appetite to go, but the organisation may in fact turn around and say, well, we don't want you to go. And that could be anything from a safety, but also from a financial perspective. And I think that that's coming out loud and clear from a respondent's perspective. And I think that this is really, you can see here, if you look at that 78% in the 25 to 49-year-old, that's actually changed. It's actually increased 30 points since May. So you can see sentiment is moving as time continues to go on. But what you'll also see there is 20% of attendees, particularly in that younger age bracket, have started to say that they're okay about doing digital events, and there's a preference for them to attend. So that becomes a challenge for us as an industry, because of course we're okay about adding value through digital events, but we still want face-to-face. And so that's the type of conversations that we need to start be having as a collective, to say, how do we actually get people attending events? What kind of events will they attend? How do we encourage corporations to invest in those events and send people along? This slide here just talks about when we think business events in fact will return. And you will see here the propensity is for business meetings to return first. And in fact, that's happening already within Asia Pacific and Australia and New Zealand. Europe started to meet. You'll see in parts of Europe they're meeting, but that's probably pulled back just a little bit over the last couple of weeks. You can see incentives, and I'm very curious to know here if there's anybody sitting on this that actually is moving forward with the business meetings, or incentives have been impacted. So, or even in fact conferences. This slide's also saying to us that the incentive groups will in fact be some of the last to come back, or they may also be much more localised. And so I guess this is actually really based on capacity restrictions. It's based on the ability to fly. But I certainly know when I'm speaking to some of our Chinese members that they're actually moving around China, and they've had to put their incentives in a very different platform. But the business meetings, they're going back into hotels and venues. So it's a very different proposition. You'll also see by this that the actual exhibition component will, according to our customers, will be one of the slower ones coming back. And that's actually a real challenge for us, again, because there's a lot of trade, knowledge exchange going on in that area. So this is, I guess, a little bit more of an idea as to when the pent-up demand is turning on and by what sector. So you'll see here, and this again is all relative to the economy and the health of these environments. So you'll see here, and I'll use the top line of business meetings: healthcare, technology, education, telecom providers, consumers will in fact come back far quickly and are in fact back at this point in time. But where you see that there's some stress and challenges is on the economic community, whether it's manufacturing. The demand for growth has actually changed, and as a result of that, what will happen is their propensity to meet, or their requirement to meet, will in fact slow down. That actually has some very big impacts on trade shows and exhibitions. So you've just heard that they're going to be slower coming back, but sometimes the manufacturing, the ones who are showing their goods and wares on trade shows, particularly trade shows versus consumer shows, you will actually see that may change the footprint as well as the face and landscape for those. So I think it's really important, if you're in this sector or if you're actually involved in some way, shape or form in promoting those, that you understand, I guess, the health and well-being of some of that sector coming back. And you'll see, therefore, things like incentives, it's talking about it being less favourable, and the same thing with conventions and conferences to a degree, and of course exhibitions and trade shows. So it's a real challenge for us as an industry going forward. This here talks a little bit about I guess some of the key insights that we've actually found. So you can see that the younger generation are a little bit more optimistic about attending face-to-face events, and that's probably because they don't feel like they've been impacted by the virus quite as much. And we also know that many corporations have in fact cut budgets. And it's a real challenge for us around, how do we actually make sure we get people attending these? And I think that when we start talking about the young people, the difference between the younger generation and the more mature generation, a lot of it will be around what is in fact the offering that we actually will be developing for their audiences. So you can't no longer do a one size all fits. It's actually now bespoke, and we actually have this forum to do a little bit more of that. So I think we've got to start thinking about how we can be creative and what that actually does and involve for us. And you'll also notice by this that it's very clear that our North American friends are less likely to attend a regional event without containment. So if you looked at the sentiment back in May, they were more than likely happy to go regional. That's actually condensed a bit further to say they probably won't travel as much frequently. And you'll also see by this that professionals in export-orientated industries will be, in fact, more willing to travel to an event than any other. And that's, again, I think with export, it's actually about the trade and investment that's going on into those areas. And I think that it's also important to point out that event planners, which is hopefully you in this audience, are significantly more optimistic about the 2021 revenues than other stakeholders. So planners are saying we think we've got this figured out, and we're hoping we actually deliver on the revenues that we're targeting through running our event. And I think it's important to say that, how they travel and where they travel is really important. So it's the end-to-end travel component. And I think often people think airlines is it, or the hotel and the venue, but it's from the minute you actually make that decision, you've left your home to when you arrive and then return back home. And that's the challenges that most organisations and destinations face, is they don't actually have a lot of control over where their participants and their delegates are actually attending. So with all of that in mind, what we looked at was how do we actually respond to that as an organisation. What we did was categorise them into 3 areas. We talked about the participant experience. So that's actually your users. When they actually show up in this forum, what do they expect? How do they want to be treated? And what do they want to know when they actually leave? The business models for events. So no longer is it we relied on registration and sponsorship, who in fact are going to sponsor us through these events, and how do we make sure that we're generating revenue to sustain not only our event, but in some instances our businesses if you're an association. And then of course the reskilling. So what does that actually mean for us? So let's dig a little bit deeper into that. And I can't see, I must be answering all of your questions. How fantastic is that? But feel free to reach out and ask any. I will not be offended in any way, shape or form. This particular slide here talks a little bit about the experience design. And I think it's really important to understand that our customer actually is the thing that we should be thinking of more than anything. And I think that, and it's not necessarily the customer, which is our business, but it's actually the delegate who's attending those events. And I think that this is probably the most important. So safety protocols are absolutely 101. It's going to be a stock standard base introduction. So if you don't have that as part of your I guess, proposal, whether you're a planner or whether you're a destination or a venue, you must have it, and it's an absolute base expectation. But what we're also hearing is how people show up and what they actually want to achieve out of it. So you will see that most of our participants are saying that they are quite content to have a smaller gathering. So instead of thousands of people in the room, it might be 300 of the right people in the room. And so when they get there, they're actually truly having a deep and meaningful experience. And you know, some of the interviews that I've been conducting with some of the clients are talking about, you know, and I'll use a medical association. So anybody who's done medical association conferences, you know that they live and thrive off papers and posters being delivered at events. So, and of course, that when that occurred, I was talking to someone of a big international association that said that will never be replaced. All the board and the stakeholders said we can't do that in this environment. So what they did was move it online. So they moved it online. But what happened was the work was being done before they arrived at the event. But what that meant was when they're actually at the event, they're asking and getting some deep and meaningful conversations and exchanges about the work. So normally what happens is they wait to be presented at, they run out of time, they have a few questions, they go and seek someone. So what they're saying is we like having that delivered to us before. So when we're at the event, we're using our time incredibly wisely. But that's why it's also important to have the right people attending the event. So it's critical as an event planner that you really think about who's attending and why they're attending. And that in turn will also deliver the right sponsors to your events. So you've got to think a little bit differently about, you know, resetting your event, the objectives of it, what it actually means to deliver, etc. And then, of course, from an event, a participant, the location, all of that is there, but the ability for them to have really fantastic content. And I think the internet has proliferated free webinars everywhere, and it doesn't mean that they're necessarily all quality. I would say to you that if you were a TEDx attendee, you'd probably more than likely attend an event like that because you know when you get it, it's going to be really quality, you'll potentially pay for it, versus if it's a free event, what happens, and if you're anything like me, I'll log on, have a look, and then I'll maybe pop in and out as the day goes forward. And so that becomes the difference about your content is king, about how you actually attract them, but keep them there and keep them engaged. So for a participant, it's incredibly important. And of course, we know that from a decision maker's perspective, the design is incredibly important of of a virtual event. And of course, the pricing is very, very important. I certainly know in Asia Pacific, and particularly in certain countries, there's a lot of free stuff going on. So why would I actually pay to attend your event? And that's what you've got to give, is real meaning and a compelling story and a compelling content to have them completely engaged in that. Sorry, I'll just move on to, it's very difficult driving all of this at the very same time. It's different than being on a live stage. And I've got a couple of more questions coming here. So people are getting sick with hybrid events. Where am I? Sorry, I've lost the question. There we go. How do we maintain the attractiveness of the, sorry, it's not running off my screen, guys.
Do you need help, Karen? I can read out the questions for you.
Yeah, can you read it out? Thank you, Lynette.
Yeah, so people are getting sick with hybrid virtual events. How do we maintain the attractiveness of the events? Do you think hybrid events, virtual events will stay when everything has resumed?
What I actually think, and so PCMA held a hybrid event. The live portion was in Sydney last week, and we had over 500 participants. So we had 100 live, and the rest were in this environment. And I think there's a couple of things in that question. So in Sydney, the entire audience, from what I understand, the room was buzzing, people really excited to see each other. There's a lot of energy going on. And of course, it was all socially distanced and managed. But the real key was actually melding, and the speakers were a real challenge because we had some all over the world as well as live. And we actually were really key in making sure nearly every session had a live person on stage in Sydney as well as the virtual coming in. But the feedback that we had gotten was that it worked really well, and it was a really great example of, you know, someone live on stage in Sydney talking to a digital, because you can do that with technology nowadays. But it added value because it actually brought in speakers that we probably could not have been able to access. From a cost perspective, it was pretty good because you're only asking for speakers for a block of time versus 2 or 3 days for them to jump on a plane and travel. But it's actually was in the delivery and the production. And I think the real challenge will be, how do we actually continue to do that? So will they continue? Absolutely, there's no doubt about it. And I think there will be very much a digital component going forward. I think what will happen is that digital will offer you the global exposure. But what you want to do is actually have your live enough that you're creating a bit of FOMO, where people want to actually come into the event live, because that's what we're about, really. We want people attending. You want to put a premium on it. You want to maybe deliver a different experience. And so it will absolutely be both. I think it will stay. I'm hoping that the balance shifts, that the live get more of the numbers and the virtual pull down, but I actually also think it's an opportunity to engage a broader audience and have global input into your content. So it's not going to go away, but it's how we deliver that and how we keep them engaged. And I think the biggest pain point everybody has had has been that this is a really tricky environment as far as networking. So it's difficult for me as a presenter. I can't see a face in here. I'm talking to a camera at home, if any of you have done it. You know, you don't get feedback. So I'm sitting there going, well, are you all engaged? Are you happy with what I'm saying? Is there energy in the room? So please feel free to feed it through. But it's that type of buzz that changes the dynamic. So everybody's having to work harder. You as planners are having to work harder to keep your audience on this screen. And I will talk about that because that's actually a real skill in itself, about, you know, digital engagement. It's about you know, bringing people on the journey. You almost have to be a behavioural psychologist. So there's a lot going on there. I'll just talk a little bit about business models as well, because this is actually, you know, where you will actually start to add value. And you can see here, we talk about that events are likely to be shorter and smaller. and that budgets will actually drive some of that. So we know that we're saving costs, if you like, in certain areas on events. But I'd also say to you that I know we did, like I say, our event last week, and the production was like a TV. And there's a cost to that, but we also felt we had to do it for it to protect and project our reputation and the quality of the content. So you will invest, but what it means is, you know, how do you invest? What are you investing in? And I'll touch on that on the skills. And what that means for an event planner is that the complexity of budget planning is just not as cut and dry as it used to be. If you think about when you put your budget together, you probably had a layout and you ticked all the boxes and said, yep, I'll put signage in here and I'll get speakers over here and I'll put gifts in here. This is now saying, well, how much do you want for production? What do your internet costs? What is the software programs? And it's not one software program, by the way. It's a multitude of programs that need to talk to each other. Software such as this that talks to registration, that then talks to your production team. So there's a lot of complexity involved in this from the business model perspective. And so that, I guess, is what people have to start thinking about. If I'm producing something, can I give it away for free? Probably not. But I'd also say to you, if your content is solid and your experience is good, people will pay. So people paid to attend our conference last week, and it was fantastic because then, you know, the feedback we got was that it was absolutely worthwhile. So it wasn't, you know, just me speaking, it was true quality speakers that were addressing the challenge that they were needing. So I think it's really important to understand about the business model within events. This also just talks a little bit about what's going on from, you know, whether you're in a venue, what that actually means for you from, you know, the use of your space. So whether you've got a great big convention space as a convention centre standalone, or whether you're a hotel with massive facilities, how you use that space will change. And the technology that you have in that space will also change. And it's not, by the way, just about technology. And I talk about that. So the example I used previously about the medical, when they come together, they don't necessarily want to be together in a environment that is, you know, classroom style or theatre style like we used to know. They want something that's a little bit more lounge style, so, you know, relaxed. And you could see over time venues were doing that, but this actually, again, will actually be amplified. And it's a real challenge for businesses to, you know, if you're a venue, to start thinking about what your ROI is and how your asset gets utilised, and how do you actually make sure that you're delivering back returns to your stakeholders involved in that. I would also say that from a technical perspective, that people think of it almost in one dimension, and a number of technical issues. So it's not only the software, it's actually the production that goes behind that, and then actually your engagement piece in that. So as you're using technology, it's incredibly important to make sure that, and I think someone told me there was something like 120 providers in this capacity of software for presenting online. So where do you start for your selection, and how do you actually make sure that you're buying the best product that will integrate with all of the other technology that you actually have? But also I'd sit there and say it's making that experience even better. And I think no one has nailed the networking. So I know some of you I can see are dropping you know, comments about where you're at, all of that. That's fantastic. But it's not the same as meeting over a cup of coffee, right? And just having that, you know, drink in a bar late at night and exchanging information. So I think it's really important that you think about the technology that you're doing and the omni-channel environment. And I'll talk a little bit about omni in a moment, what that actually means, because it's really important to understand it's no longer one-dimensional. You're actually talking across many, many areas. Let's talk about skills now. So reskilling is, and I liken this to, you know, what did you do as an event planner in the past, and what will you be doing in the future? But also if you're a venue, quite frankly, or on the supply side, you really need to be thinking differently about the skills that you actually have. And we know that everybody talks about designing a digital experience. So I would sit there and say to you, it's not easy. And I know, I've just lived it. So, and I am not a digital event specialist, but I've sat there and some of the stuff that I had actually learned was the things like you had to marry technology, but I had to all of a sudden move out of event planning mode to become a broadcaster, a creative, a writer. So even though I didn't produce it, in our instance, George P. Johnson did, we were actually having to exchange information about what the kind of expectations we were and the experience that we wanted everybody to have. But from that whole stage look and feel, and then how that translated into this environment, and then of course through the omnichannel. So if you're watching on your phone, if you were actually receiving any of the communications out from us, it all had to be 100% seamless. And I think that is thinking about, the sales and marketing, how you attract sponsors. And I sit there and think about, it's that whole customer engagement from side to side. And I'll just talk a little bit about one of the things that came out in the surveys loud and clear from our planners side was that they actually really felt that they really needed to upskill their jobs. And that goes back from, you were doing marketing before, but now you are truly doing digital marketing. And you're doing digital marketing that will actually give you insights to actually start to build your audience engagement. So I say that by saying if you attract someone in, you're collecting data. Now, data is wonderful as long as you actually extract insights out to it. So you start to understand your customer, when they're buying, how they want to be communicated to. That is incredibly important for an event planner nowadays. And it was always there, it just wasn't supersized. So you're becoming a true digital marketing specialist. I'd sit there and say you're becoming a behavioural scientist as well, because that's the information that you're actually gathering from the data as you go. And then the whole omnichannel experience is really important to start thinking about what information you look, you feel, your technology that you're actually bringing through. And of course, then it's the whole of the investment that you want to actually make in that. And that I would sit there and say to you, it's an investment in yourself and your skills, but it's an investment for your business. If you're looking at things like PCMA does a digital event strategist course, it's absolutely sold like it's gone through the roof because people have said, I need to learn how to do events in a digital world. And you need to be able to talk the language, and you need to be able to think about what implications the technology will have on your event going forward. So there will definitely be a reinvention of skills. You'll be a producer, a broadcaster, you'll be a tech specialist, you'll be a digital marketer, and it's exciting because there's lots of new things for you to do, but you need to do that to remain relevant in your business, but also to make sure that your business remains relevant and the conferences and events that you're putting on, in fact, bring that to life. So just to give you an idea as a summary, and I'm conscious of time, and I do want to leave it open for any questions that you may have, so feel free. I think it's really important from a participant experience to make sure that you really do understand who your audience are and what they find valuable. So why are they showing up and why will they be spending their money with you? Because that's what you want. Essentially. So in the face-to-face environment, the hygiene standards are baseline. And so whoever you're doing your business with, if you're a planner, you obviously need to make sure you tick that off. But if you're a supplier, you need to make sure that that's actually incredibly relevant and consistent. And I think, again, we just talked about the content has to be top-notch, production of it, and of course the services that you're actually delivering through it. And then I think it's actually about how do you start to innovate that. So if you're in this environment and you're all sitting online here, how do you want to engage? What are the conversations do you want to have that you will actually make sure that you walk away not just with information, but you've traded knowledge, you're collaborating with people, you're building new relationships, you're extending relationships, and that's incredibly important for a participant going forward. And I think it's also making sure that we actually have a really targeted strategy for our audience. So when we talk about globalization, everybody talks about we'll just go mass, and it's actually, I don't believe, as simple as that. It's actually really thinking about how you want to go, the tools that you actually have in hand, and what your strategy is, your data strategy. So how are you capturing that information and how are you using it? And I will just give you a little sneak peek of the Omnichannel experience. So this was our event last week, and what this did was show you that this was the live portion in Sydney. You can see that we had here, this was what you saw if you were on the web component of it, looking in this environment. And of course, you can see that your technology is incredibly important, and your interaction. And so for a hybrid, that's, you know, the whole omni-channel. So people watching on their phone, they were getting communications out of us. There was the live component of it. So it's actually very exciting for us to do that. I think it's probably one of the first true hybrids for quite some time. And so it was really exciting to produce it. And we were all sitting back. I was sitting in Melbourne. The event was in Sydney, so I couldn't even attend my own event in Sydney. And I think most of me and the team said it's the first historic event. It's a historic event for all of us, because we've actually pulled together an event and none of us physically attended the event. We were reliant on everybody else. So that was really important about who your partners were. And it is about embracing technology, knowing who your audience are. And it's no longer actually just delivering events, but it's creating an experience for your audience. It's engaging that audience and entertaining them, so have some fun. So treat it like, the best way to describe it for me would be treat it like you would treat a TV show. So there's interludes and breaks, it's entertaining to watch, and people stay completely informed. And then from the business model, this is actually, and the omni-channel really helps you here. How do you monetize your new channels? So when you're talking about you've done your event, how do you make sure that you're starting to think about podcasts? What's your social media like? What's your engagement like? And really rethink your sponsorship strategy. And this here is about your sponsors don't want just numbers thrown at them through the data. The insights that you get from that data, how they're committing, how they're communicating, where are they going with your sponsor, is absolutely critical for value for your sponsorship. So don't underestimate that you can actually give your sponsor better profile, better information in this technology, in this environment. And of course, it is about extending your reach. So you heard me talk about global, but let's get quality global, let's get the right people attending, and let's actually make sure we gather that information and use it to inform our next event, but also, like I say, add value to the sponsorships. And again, it is your value chain. So an event is an ecosystem, as you know, it's from beginning to end, and you need to make sure that value chain is all working and in sync with each other as you go forward. And of course, from a skilling perspective, I believe this is probably almost one of the #1 things that you actually have to do. And I say that because if you've got the skills to design your event going forward, all of the other stuff about business models and omnichannel will in fact fall into place. So you really need to be thinking about the fact that, you know, you and your team and the people you employ need to be digital producers. You need to have data literacy. You need to be safety and hygiene experts. But you need to make sure that the people you're employing and bringing on as your partners actually understand that at the same time. So I would say to you to make sure that you continually invest, whether it's your own education or your business education, your planners, your supply side, definitely make sure that you're investing in the upskilling and reskilling. And after running our event last week, I can tell you I learned a whole lot about digital language and how it all connected and worked. And it was good because I feel much more informed to be able to operate in that environment in future going forward. Now, I am not a core event planner. That's not what I do. We've got teams that do that. But for me, it was important to understand, as someone who heads up a business, what it was I was expecting and how could we actually fulfill our audience needs. And of course, I would say to you to start thinking about your partnerships that you actually have and how do you start developing the pipeline of talent going forward. So with that said, I am happy to take some questions.
I can
now.
read out some questions again. Okay, so first questions. PCMA is doing joint training with a few ASEAN associations partners. What's the response like and projected result impact in 2021?
We are doing training. So we're doing training in a number of areas. So PCMA is a professional development organisation first and foremost, and we are about education. So that's our core remit. And we're about education of planners and of course the supply side as well. So you know, we are not in the rhythm of sales. What we are doing is in fact delivering you skills to do your job well. So some of the partnerships that we've done, and we've done them with TCEV, we've done them with STB, we've done some up in Japan, where we go in and provide various lots of training. And some of it's through the Digital Event Strategist course that we run. Some of it is bespoke training for them. The supply chain came through very strong, talking about they don't know how to sell anymore and they want an environment like this to sell. So how do we do that without it being a sales job? And the clients are saying to us, I actually want partners. I don't want to be sold at. But what I do know is that I need education. So some of the you know, TCEBs and STBs are actually paying for clients to get educated. And it's a win-win. So they're not only paying for their own staff and the supply chain, they're actually paying for their clients. They need to talk the same language and be on the same page. So it's going really well. And in fact, the quality of PCMA, I don't think anybody has that hand on my heart in the region. We really like to make sure we're delivering good stuff. And you know, it's driven by you, the audience, that want it. And so the content is developed around that. So I hope that answered that question.
So if you have any issue, I mean, if you have anything you would like to find out, you can actually check on your discussion forum. So I think Philip from Singapore, also from PCMA, he's there in his product, provided all the website links that you can just refer to. Okay.
Oh, good work, Philip.
The next questions. So, okay, this is a hard one. Any tips on designing a virtual program? Managing attendees' expectations for a free event is tough nowadays. How to design a program that is chargeable?
We had the very same thing. So you know, PCMA have always been invested heavily into programs and content. And content is absolutely king. And we were given a little bit of I don't know whether people pay in Asia Pacific for, and our rate, by the way, was $95 US dollars. So we just made it very, very simple. We just said, you know what, we just want to do a really easy charge, get more people involved, and think about, you know, who some of our partners would be that we actually distributed. You know, in some instances they got some discounts. So we were trying to bring that community along. But we felt really strongly that the content had to be top notch. So we made sure that we reached out to some of our partners to help us along, used our network for good quality, and look, fortunately, I'm fairly well connected in the industry. So, you know, we got the CEOs of some of the biggest marketing organisations at the table. We had all of the big agencies, George P. Johnson, Jack Morton, we had, you know, Rebecca from Google, all of them were prepared to get up and talk about panels. So we had really good people who were live living it. and sharing their experiences, and they were experts, but we also had some of those big name speakers. So I guess what would happen is if you looked at that program, you would say, first of all, it's worth my time, because that's actually your biggest commitment. It was a 4-hour program. Is it worth my time? Just like you've participated today. What am I going to learn that will keep me there for an hour? And how much is that worth to me? And so if you actually add those up, then all of a sudden you will actually, your content will drive that. So I don't care who says to me, webinars are webinars, and everybody's become an expert in this field. But I think it's actually, if you're getting true experts in, people will in fact pay for that. And I actually know in our region it's a little bit more difficult than most, but I think we've got to start charging for it, because what that's doing is recognising the value of you and your organisation and the quality that you bring. And the gentleman who spoke from the Australian the Australian Advertising Association said he had to reinvent his entire conference. But what he did was it was smaller. He said there were normally 600 people, they've gone to 300, but he said what we've got is the right people there. And the content has been built around that, and the sponsors came on board to support it. So it really will, we've always talked about content is king, but I also think we could be a bit lazy in not always doing it as well as we could, whereas now it's really is. I ask myself as a customer, what do I want to see? What would I pay for? And I have paid for training in this environment, and I've had good experiences. So I hope that helps.
Okay, so I think we have time for one last questions. Okay, so with all the data, it looks like the live event is going to resume in 2021. So what's the top criteria for a PCO to consider when planning for the event next year?
The top criteria, well, I actually think your location will be really important. Access, because people want access into a location. So if you are planning a hybrid, you'll want to be in a destination that will actually, if it's not got a very good local population, that's going to be harder. You just heard that they talked about locals will attend. So, and we purposely put our event in Sydney because we knew we had a large population to draw from. We're about to announce we've got convening leaders in January next year, and you'll be very pleased to know I am the Asia Pacific champion with my team, and we are getting for the very first time a hub in Asia Pacific. But the intent of that is it's absolutely a central place, and that we will be able to attract people to it. If they can't get on a plane and go, at least we're in a good friendly time zone. So think about that time zone. Like I say, content, how do you attract local attendees, who your producer is, all of that is really important going forward.
All right, I think that's pretty much about it. So hand over to you, Karen, just for a quick closing.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you everybody for participating in this. I can see the numbers have jumped up and down a little bit through the session. And again, that's what happens when you're in this environment. But I appreciate all of you for staying around, learning a little bit more about what's going on. Business Events Compass, you can find the summary or a really high line level available on the website. If you want to go to that, PCMA.org. And of course, anything I've talked about today is available there, from your reskilling training to opportunities. But I want to assure you that PCMA have been in the region for 4 or 5 years now. We're here to stay. We believe strongly that Asia-Pac is in fact going to be, we know the populations here and the growth will go, but this is our time to shine, is the way I see it. And I want us to work more collaboratively together. So, you know, you think of Europe and North America often collaborate, even though there might be different countries. In APAC, we don't as well as we could. And I'd just love to see us build that going forward, because I just think we're in a very good place now and will be into our future. So with that, thank you for your time. Like I say, very happy for you to jump online and contact myself or Philip, and we can go forward with getting you on the journey.
Thanks, Karen. So the recording will be available tomorrow, so you can just come into the same portal to check it out. So once again, thanks, Karen, for your valuable time. So I hope we can meet face to face again soon. Yeah.
Yes. It'd be good, won't
Thank
it?
you, Karen.
Thank you. Bye.